All right, we're back in business here, and I think we're going to do a bonus problem today. We're going to do 11 problems in this short quiz, all right, instead of our usual 10, because they're so related, and I just think it's useful, and we've been moving through this lesson pretty well. So let's try this. All right, number 10 goes like this. It says, in which figure will the majority of the tax burden fall on buyers? So you've got three figures, panel A, panel B, and panel C, all right? And I've mislabeled these. So let me do this. This is panel C, and this is panel B on your test, all right? Let's avoid some confusion in the middle, before it happens here. So you want to know, again, in which market will the majority of the burden of the tax be borne by consumers? Panel A, B, or C? Now, why would consumers bear the burden of the tax? You have to go back to our chapters on elasticity and think about elasticity. When demand is relatively inelastic, and the classic example is cigarettes, all right? People must have their cigarettes. When the government taxes cigarettes, because demand is so inelastic, cigarette smokers end up paying the burden of the tax. So, in which of these three panels is the demand curve relatively inelastic? That's your point. It's obviously B, okay? But let me give you an example and show you why. Let's say I impose a sales tax in B, and it goes like this. Causes the supply curve to shift back by the tax. Here's S1, or S1, plus tax. And here is what happens. Because demand is relatively inelastic, the equilibrium quantity falls very little. Goes from Q0 to Q1. It's a very small decline. And what's happened to equilibrium price? Well, price has gone up. Here's the initial equilibrium, P0. But now consumers, because they're so addicted to this good, because they must have this good, their demand is relatively inelastic. It's very steep. So here's price after tax, all right? And the price received by suppliers, not that different, right? I mean, it's about right here. I'll put PS here. Here's the original price. There's the price received by sellers. They don't do that badly here. Why? Because consumers are so in need of this good, are so addicted to good, have such an inelastic demand for this particular good, that the tax goes up. Consumers don't cut back very much at all. Smokers didn't cut back immediately anyway on their cigarette consumption, although the long-term effect has been greater. And therefore, they end up paying the burden of the tax because they have to have it, because their demand is inelastic, because for them it's some kind of necessity, all right? So that's panel B, and that would be your answer. And then we have to follow up and ask you the next question, which is the bonus question for this week. It says refer to figure 625, which is what this is. And it says, in which market will the majority of the tax burden fall on sellers? In which market will it fall on sellers? Well, we know it's not panel B because we just did that problem, all right? But now let's look at it. Is it going to fall on panel A or is it going to fall on panel C? Well, when in doubt, draw as usual. Let's take the supply curve and let's make a supply curve with a tax. Here we go. And we'll make a supply curve with a tax on this one, just because we'll just be completely thorough here, all right? I tried to make them the same amount of the tax, but I don't know if I got there perfectly. Again, to figure this out, you're always going to compare the after-tax price to the equilibrium price. So that's P0, and here is going to be the after-tax price paid by suppliers. So we'll put TS for suppliers. And up here, now, because of the way I've drawn these curves, anyway, what's going to happen, though, as you can see, is that the equilibrium price for consumers hasn't gone up very much. Whatever this tax is, the sellers are going to pay the lion's share. So here's P consumers, here's P sellers, there's P initial. So let me stop and just pull back for a second. The answer is clearly A, panel A. And the reason it is because sellers are now inelastic. They can't change their behavior. When the tax goes into effect, they don't cut back on the supply curve very much, or quantity supplied, because it's relatively insensitive to price. It's inelastic. And because of that, sellers end up, if this is the initial equilibrium, they end up selling or cutting back only by this much, but consumers cut back a fair amount. And what happens is that this distance is the tax. If this is the original price, then the price received by sellers is PS. The government gets its tax, that's this distance right there. The consumers pay PC. So the after-tax price paid by or received by sellers is this right here. That is really a long ways from that one up there, okay? The point of the story is, whichever market has the more inelastic response, whether it's inelastic demand or inelastic supply, that particular part of the market, the buyer or the seller, will pay the burden, the greater burden of the tax. I'll say it again. If consumers' demand is inelastic, they will, relative to the suppliers, they will pay the majority of the tax. If suppliers' supply curve is relatively inelastic compared to consumers' demand, they will pay the larger burden of the tax. And hopefully you can see it from these diagrams. Here, always get this distance has to be the tax. That's the amount the government has to receive. And then you always figure out, okay, well, how far did the price fall to the suppliers from the original equilibrium? And how much did the price rise to consumers from that original equilibrium? This is the portion of the amount paid by consumers. As a little bit is the amount paid by suppliers. Consumers clearly took a hit here and paid the burden of the tax. The opposite is here, right? This inelastic supply curve ends up pushing the burden of the tax to the suppliers relative to the consumers. And that's it. We're done chapter 6. It's an important chapter. We're going to pick up taxes again in chapter 8. In the meantime, we're going to do chapter 7, which is on consumer and producer surplus. And that's going to help us analyze what the welfare effects are of taxes. In other words, does society benefit from taxes? Or do taxes cause a decrease in the welfare of society? So, that's coming down the road. I'll see you for recitation in chapter 7.